G'day everyone. Thought I promised you basically that I'd come and do the live show today. I couldn't actually do the live show on my usual day, Friday Melbourne time, due to the fact that I had a shoot to do. I might even take you through that shoot and you can have a quick look at some of the real fun bits we did about it. Let me just switch over just for a second because I'll bring it up a little bit later and show you what I did with the Deb shoot that I did, which we had so much fun. So I'll show you that just for a second. And then yesterday I had a wedding to do, so I've been flat out. So I haven't been able to do a live shoot, a live discussion with you guys. So I thought I'd pop in today and have one with you. So it's Sunday afternoon here, 1:34 in the afternoon. Obviously it's going to be Saturday in Europe and the US. So I hope we can get a few in because I'm not sure how this will go at this time being the weekend for you guys. But just thought I'd pop in and have a chat with you about some news and rumours, some other things, reviews of the A7 III that have just come out. I was going to go through that with you a little bit. And obviously I'll take you through a shoot that I did as well. So just want to say cheers. It is another Corona day today, but I have got it in my little Aussie. Oi, oi, oi. We always go Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi. That's the famous saying that we have down here. So I've got it in a little stubby hole. We call these little things stubby holders. So cheers, guys. I hope if you've got a beer, please crack one with me. We say crack a stubby, so crack a stubby with me and have a drink with me. I have even a bit more today because I'm going to Taco Bill, which is Mexican, this afternoon, late this evening. Well, I'm about 5:30 with the family, and I'll be having a few margaritas and stuff there as well. I think it's going to be a good day. I had a guy not long ago in the comments accusing me of being an alcoholic, and I said, all I have is one drink with you guys. But I just laughed when he said that. So anyway, I thought, yeah, I'd go through a stack of stuff with you. So say hi in the chat if you are actually here. Let's have a look, just see who's on board. So we've got Video Masters here. Got my beer. That's great, mate. Good to see you've got it. Richard's here. Alex is also here. Reza's here. It's Sunday. What's going on? Not much so far. I've been recovering from yesterday's wedding. It was quite a hot one yesterday, but it was a beautiful day, though. And like I said, I'll show you a shot from that because I talk about not using my 70-200 much, but there are times when I do use it, and I'm going to show you a situation where I used that yesterday. And I'll show you the editing that I did, because I did something a little bit different in the editing of that, because I wanted to make it a more of an impact image to show as the sneak peek. So I'll talk to you about that shortly. Reza's here, South Melbourne. Yeah, I know it's windy here too in Bacchus Marsh, Reza. It's not a good day. I'm glad the wedding was yesterday and not today. It is really windy today. Alex is here, Gerald's here, Rui's here saying, hello, waiting for you to come on. It's like waiting for a friend to stop by. Thanks for saying that. Xeon, is it? Or Exxon, I'm not sure. Said, good morning from Singapore. Good to see you here. David's here. Hi from the lake in Ozarks, I think it is. Creative Films also here. Kevin Barrett's here as well. Like our normal shows, this is going to go for a while, no doubt, guys. But basically, you know, if you're not interested in, what's that, Cracked and Dirty? Oh, I think I'll hide that. If you're not interested in joining us for the long one, perhaps you can join in later on and then skip to bits that more interest you. So, yeah, anyway, I'd love you all to say hi. Now, obviously, you've got in the chat box, if you want to put in questions that you're seeing live, ask there. Put at David Oasley if you definitely want to get my attention. Otherwise, put it... and that way I'll come back at the end and I'll put the questions up and I can answer all your questions. So we'll go through those all together. If you're not in live, obviously put the questions down below and I'll answer those as soon as I can. And I do always try and answer all the questions that people put in the description box down below. So yeah, so anyway, I thought what I'll do first off is anyway show this because I know I mentioned this a few times, but I'm really keen on getting a lot of you over onto this side, photography and videography page. I will put the link down below. In fact, I can't do that yet, but I will put it down below in the comments because that way you can join us there, and it's a great site for you all that I've set up on Facebook where we can all interact. And I'm running things like competitions. There's one at the moment, which is this week's task is colour. And the winner is going to be put as the header of the group. And if you look at some of the things already that we've had submitted, we've got a stack of things that are already put in where people are submitting different images. You know, we're getting stacks of stuff basically that people are submitting. I try and critique a little bit in there as well. You know, but we have some great stuff in there, guys. And it's a site where you can promote your business. So if you are trying to get into this industry, you know, put in your Instagram feeds in there, put in your YouTube feeds. The only thing I don't allow is live video broadcast, because that's for me to talk live on there. And you're limited to 3 uploads per day. But apart from that, yeah, to promote your business, share what you're doing, share your videos, everything else. So please join us in there if you haven't. And like I said, I've set this up for you. So let's get started anyway, because I want to talk about the latest things that are coming in, because we've got some really interesting stuff that's going to be coming up. Because I looked at this just before, and this is on DP Review. This is a really interesting article because it's basically going all through the Sony A7 III. Just let me make my watch and phone go quiet, because otherwise it's going to bug us. Always forget to do that. And why are we doing that? I might as well have a drink. Cheers, guys. So this is a review of the Sony A7 III, and I will put all these links down below, guys, so you can go have a look at them yourselves later on. This is really quite an extensive review if you're looking at these things, and they have diagrams here that you can compare things. This diagram, let me just hide this news. This is the noise characteristics of the camera. So this is low light, high ISO performance. And like I said, when I get my hands on the camera, it's still not released here yet. I think it's the end of this month, and it's about the 10th for you guys in the US, I think. So I will review this. And you know what, to be honest, I really do like to review things in real life world, you know, like a real life shoot. So that's what I'll be doing when I get it. I'm not a real big fan of some of these tests, but having said that, I do read them because I do find that it does give you an overall guide about how the camera will go. But sometimes in real world usage, it can act totally different. But, you know, I do like to do reviews in real life. So when I can get my hands on the camera, I will do it. So this is the ISO anyway, and they've shot it at different ISOs here. Well, they've done 2500 ISO here, and you can see if I swing over, that's the A7 II. I'm not sure how clearly this will come up on YouTube, but then the A7 III, if I switch between the two, I think the A7 III actually is a fraction cleaner. I think the noise is a bit more uniform and not quite as harsh as what the A7 III is. And clearly the A7 II, if you look at the A7 II, well, there's a dramatic difference in what the ISO is between the A7 II as against the A7 III. So it's interesting when you're looking at those performance as well. It's just saying at the top, it's a comparatively, I'll just scroll this back up to here. Deeper reviewer saying that the A7 III is comparatively affordable full-frame mirrorless camera that incorporates a host of advanced features from the A9 and the A7 III. And it just says the combination of price point and feature set makes it attractive. And that's actually what I found too, that like I've said, I think the price point of this camera is just amazing for what they're actually offering. But let's go down and just have a look at some of these things that they're actually saying in here. Now this diagram here, it's saying here that the A7 III more matches the base ISO dynamic range of the A7 III. So basically it's got the same base dynamic range of the A7 III when both are viewed at a common size. We normalize the images at 8 megapixels. So they've downsampled the A7 III A7 III to match the A7 III at a common megapixel size, so therefore you should get a closer look at what the dynamic range does. And basically they're saying that in the numbers that's 14.6 EV and 14.8 EV. So the A7 III is 14.6 EV and the A7R is 14.8. But it's a little bit different as the ISO goes up, and I'll talk to you about that. But overall, the dynamic range is fantastic for both of these cameras. You know, you're looking at 0.2 difference is nothing. And if you're looking here at this diagram, it actually says the A7 III is in orange and the A7R III is in blue. And it will change depending on where the ISO actually sits. You can see some places that the A7R is below, and then in some areas it actually comes above. depending on where the ISO is. And I'll talk to you about this in a minute. But basically what they're saying is that's essentially the camera's second base ISO, where the second stage of dual gain architecture kicks in at ISO 640 and above. When it becomes over 640, what this is saying is that the A7 III is slightly better than what the A7R III is until you get to over, well, I think it's probably around about 5100 or something like that. So if you're dealing with 6400, the ISO is, the dynamic range is actually better in the A7 III, around 6400 ISO. Below that, the A7R is just a fraction better. Over that, the A7 III is a fraction better. But either way, you're getting an amazing camera here for the price, and the dynamic range is pretty amazing. It also says here, but it shows a marked improvement over its predecessor. So that's what you're looking at here in this diagram. So the A7 II is in green and the A7 III is in orange. So you really are getting a massive bonus of going to the A7 III in dynamic range and also in ISO as well. But let's keep scrolling down and we'll have a look down here. This is compressed versus uncompressed. RAW, again, the A7 III is much better. What else did I want to talk about here? Oh, yeah, now remember I was talking before about the ISO? It's saying, does this mean that I should shoot ISO instead of 320? Basically, what they're saying is that the sweet spot for this camera is ISO 640 if you're dealing with getting the ultimate dynamic range and ISO. But I think they're still saying that you should not, what is it saying here? For example, say you could set the shutter speed and aperture to expose ISO 320 properly, you should not rather choose 640. Now, I think what they're saying when you read this is, if you expose perfectly, the lower the ISO is obviously going to be better. But if the sweet spot for this camera in dealing with ISO and dynamic range is 640, but I think it's a bit confusing when you read it. The A9 is the same. I think the perfect ISO, I think, for the A9 is ISO 800, I think, or it was 800 or 900. I can't remember. I know it was somewhere up there that they worked at the ISO and dynamic range was best at that setting. Either way, both cameras are fantastic. So this camera is getting basically the same ISO and the same dynamic range as the A7R III. We'll look down at the summary because it might make a little bit more sense here. The A7 III ISO 100 24 megapixels is 13.8 at ISO 100. And then when it's downsampled, the A7 III is 14.6, so if you're going to 8 megapixels. The ISO, if you're dealing with ISO 640, it becomes 13.4. The A7 III compressed is 12.3. But if you look down at the A7R III here, I think for some reason then the battery light came on. I don't know. If you look down here, the A7R III at ISO 100 is 14 EV. The A7 III is 13.8 EV. If you're dealing with 640, it's 13.4, and it's 13.1 down here. And if you're looking at the A9 is 12.6 EV at 100 ISO, and it's 12.4 EV at 640 ISO. So you'd have to read all these figures and go through the table of how it actually works out. But the interesting thing is, when I was reading up there, I may have been a little bit confused because I thought it was saying the best ISO was ISO 640. But looking at this, it's actually still just a fraction. ISO 100 is saying 13.8, but it was 13.4. I'll have to read this fully. Oh no, there you go. If you went to 8 megapixel, that's where it comes in. The ISO is 14.2. Yeah. So anyway, it's an interesting article if you read all through this anyway. So I'll put this in the description box down below so you can have a look at this and read it all. I think that first one is really interesting up here, that you can see the ISO between those three cameras, that there's clearly a big jump between the A7 III and the A7 II. The A7R and the A7 III are fairly close. I just think the A7 II looks a fraction better on that test, but let me know what you think about that. And I'll come back to the questions in a minute, guys. There's another thing here too. These I did do a discussion a few days ago about the digital SLRs. Basically, we're going to disappear. I talked about that in that discussion. But this is some diagrams that Sony just showed the other day. Cheers. And I just wanted to talk to you too, because it was really interesting. I did get quite a few Canon fanboys particularly jump in and start to say rubbish, it's never going to happen, and this is just like film days, guys. All these people, these photographers that used to use film, blinkers on, you can argue as much as you like with me. You should be reading what's happening and see the writing on the wall of what's going to happen. I wasn't saying there that Sony is going to basically just take over everyone, but I'm saying unless you move into the mirrorless market, you are going to be in trouble. And that's what that whole discussion was about. But naturally, we got some Canon fanboys that hop in, and they probably haven't even got any work either to back up what they're saying. But, you know, they immediately were saying ridiculous things like it's not going to happen. You know, you're just a Sony fanboy, things like that. It was just, people just can't have a good discussion, unfortunately. But this, just let me move this. These charts, basically what they're showing here, this was done at the Sony A7 III presentation. Sony did show these two slides. It shows a growing importance of mirrorless and also the increasing market share from Sony. And when you look at this, now this is overall, this is the worldwide market for full frame cameras. And you're seeing here that mirrorless is in the green down the bottom. This is all the other digital SLRs combined. Now you can see there that Sony has actually taken quite a big chunk. When you're dealing with only one brand here, you think that this is mixed with Canon, Nikon, Pentax, all other brands here, Fuji, Panasonic. You can see that Sony actually have taken a big chunk of that market. And if you look at this, is really interesting, because if you look at this graph here, this is how much mirrorless has improved. This again is how much the digital SLR market has declined. And this is why I'm saying to you that these guys with blinkers are going to get caught. Now, my suggestion to you was really that you may have to consider your strategy for moving into mirrorless. Now, whether that was trying to think about, are you going to keep your lenses and then adapt, or are you going to think about selling your stuff and moving over and not trying to lose too much? Because if Canon do bring out a new mount, no one knows how well that's going to work with that system. And that's what I was trying to say by that whole video. And remember, that document wasn't mine that I read. That was another person's view. It was on Petapixel, I think. But it was just a discussion on that. But these are talking about that. Now, it does back up what I was talking about in that other document. If you look at that graph here for mirrorless as against digital SLRs. And if you talk about the worldwide mirrorless market, look at Sony's amount there that they actually are now dominating in that sector of the market. It's incredible when you think, you know, how much they've actually grown when you look at that. I mean, it's incredible. So Sony are really doing very well. And let me say to you, with the A7 III, this is going to, I'd love to see what these figures are going to be by the end of the year. And, you know, we're just going to have to see. And again, this, as soon as you start talking about Sony in this way, you get labelled as a Sony fanboy. Remember, I'm only talking about what works for me now, and I'm only showing you what's out there and basically what is the truth. Some guys have to just take away their blinkers and not do this Sony fanboy business and you know, just move on and get on with life and realise that perhaps there is a change in the industry. Do you want to be left like film photographers a while ago? The ones that refused to change went broke. And that's the thing that you're going to have to make a decision on, which way you go. And I definitely said the other day, if you were starting out now in this industry, if I was a young photographer, or I would say to any young photographer, you don't have to buy Sony, but any photographer that was now coming into the marketplace that doesn't have a whole swath of lenses, you should move over, and you should really be buying Sony, because the A7 III is the one I'd be suggesting that you get. But, you know, anyway, let's get back to this these charts, because it's really interesting discussion going through it. So that completely backed up what I was saying the other day in that discussion. If we look down here, We've got the industry change, Sony at full frame. Worldwide interchange lens cameras, full frame, other formats. You can see here that the full frame really is starting to really move in. Now, the other formats obviously would be things, I suppose, like micro four thirds, APS-C cameras, things like that. But you can see that full frame is really quite a decent sector now there. And I think that's probably going to grow now with what's happening. I mean, I seriously would have a bit of an issue now buying the A6500, and I'll talk about that in another story in a few minutes, but I would have a bit of an issue buying the A6500 now because of what the A7 III has to offer. It would be a very hard decision to go back that way. I'd be probably recommending everyone get the A7 III and use that. And don't forget, you can still use your APS-C lenses on it. That's exactly what I did the other day with this. That's my A7R II, which I used on the wedding on the weekend. I wanted to get some wide shots of the whole group, so I used this lens on there. Now, I've also got the 16 to 35 f4. I could have used that, but the problem was where I was shooting, I couldn't get the whole group in. This lens gives me 12 to it gives me 12 to 16, so I'll get the actual, all I have to make sure is I do is put 12 on there, and I can go up to 16 and get full frame look on this using this lens. And it's not what you call a GM lens, but it's certainly good enough for what I was trying to get for that type of image, and I'm quite comfortable using it at that focal length. I could go, and I always use this on video too, and as soon as you go into APS-C, well then you can use the full, you know, you can use a full 10 to 18, but on full frame you can use this on those settings, 12 to 16. So you can use the APS-C glass. If you, for instance, if you have bought just a couple of lenses, APS-C lenses, well, you can still use them on that camera. The only thing you've got to be careful of is if you do use it in Super 35, you do lose basically half the resolution. So it's okay on the A7R II because you get roughly an 18, 19 megapixel file. If you're doing it on the A7 III though, if you're using it for stills, you're going to get around about 10, 11 megapixels. So yeah, you'd have to be careful with that. But you certainly could use it for video. Anyway, so I wanted to talk to you about that. So let's look at this. So that's the worldwide interchange lens cameras. You can see full frame there. Sony worldwide full frame business. You can see how much it's grown over that period of time. And that's amazing when you look at the growth of their full frame cameras. Sony are doing incredibly well, and they are only going to do better and better this year due to that camera that they've just released. Now don't forget too that they've still got to release the A7 III yet. That will be coming out sometime. I probably think it will be September in Photokina. I don't think it will be released in April due to the fact that the A7 III is really officially released in the US in April. So I can't see them releasing it then because it might take away some sales of the A7 III. Now, I also noticed that Max Yuryev, let me just see if I can bring this up, because I haven't watched it yet. I'll just show you the video, because I'd like to bring that up. Max has just done a video here, which talks about the Sony A7. Don't watch it yet. Don't go over yet. Have a look at it after we've finished. But he's just done a detailed A7 III versus the A7 II comparison. So if you are interested in that, have a look at that after we've finished our discussion. So yeah, I thought that I'd just say what that is. Max's reviews are usually really well done. So check that out after we've finished here. I might even put that link down below. Did I just let me move that because I think I've still got it playing. I know I must have closed it. All right, so let's go back to this discussion. So that takes that past anyway. All right, so let's go also to this Sony interview, which was interesting because there's a couple of things I wanted to discuss with you about this as well. So this is Kenji Takata, I think his name is. He's the Senior General Manager of Sony Digital Imaging Business. So basically what he's done here, that people have asked him all of these questions that he answered these questions. I thought I'd go through it, which were interesting, because basically he said, what is your target market for the A7 III? I'm not going to read the whole thing out of there, but basically he was saying that there is no real target market for the A7 III. It's basically going to be one that the masses could use, and that's where I think this camera actually fits in. Remember, we've got the A9, which is basically specifically targeted really for sports shooters. And until this was released, it was definitely the best wedding and events camera out there. And then we've got the A7 III, which is more related to landscape, architecture, doing high-end portraits, that sort of stuff. If you're after a general camera that will do everything, this is the camera. It's the A7 III is the main camera that you'd use for that type of scenario. And he's basically said that was where that camera fitted in. And that's why I'm saying I think that's probably easily the best wedding and events camera that is out there on the market at the moment. He also says in here too that, and I'll put these links down below so you will be able to read them all. Sony had a very busy year. What are your priorities going into 2018 and beyond? He's saying here that lenses are important, like the 400mm f2.8. He's basically said that he realised that with the release of the A9 that they needed sports lenses, and I think you're going to see more in that area as well. And probably things like the 135 will come out. Some stuff like that will be coming out. The interesting thing that he said, though, is that the 400mm 2.8 is very light and you can use it handheld. I don't know if I'd want to do that, but he is saying that you can use that, and he says, which makes it easy to create different kinds of photographs. So, interesting statement. Another statement that he's made down here is there are questions about the A9 weather sealing. Cameras like the A7 series and the A9. Is that something that you wanted to address? And he said in here that in really bad conditions, in really heavy rain, will photographers keep on taking pictures? And basically he said, and I think what he said here is true, that when you looked at that silly video really where they were throwing a hose over it, and eventually we had leaks in the Sony, and I think the Nikon had a bit of an issue, and the Canon passed with flying colours, but either way, you're not really going to have your gear out in that kind of situation. For instance, if I'm in that kind of scenario, I could use my GH5 because the weather sealing on that is nuts, but I would have my assistant holding an umbrella over me and I'd be taking photos that way. Or you could use basically your plastic covers that go over your what do they call them? I think they're saying here, I'm not sure. Yeah, they have you can put them inside little plastic covers, rain covers, things like that. So you probably would be doing that if the weather was that bad. But it would have to be really bad before you got to that case. And like I said, normally people aren't going to use their gear in that type of weather. So I think what he's basically saying at this stage is it's good enough for what he believes that people will be out there using it for. He's saying also that is this something that professional users are asking for? And he's saying that basically that there's a fine line between balance and durability and size and weight. And I suppose that's the thing that Sony at this stage are balancing between. And the interesting thing was, when I had that discussion the other day about the digital SLRs, there was a number of people said that, why would Canon have to produce a new mount? And they don't have to produce a new mount if they keep their bodies the same size as what they are. But I don't want a mirrorless camera that's the size of a digital SLR. I want my camera bodies to be the size that they are, because that's why I went that way. I don't want to be lugging around this huge weight. I don't want to be having sore backs anymore. I like the technology the way it is. I do like that quite small. If I need the camera a little bit bigger, I can put a grip on. So, yes, Canon could go down that line, but I think if they do go down that line, I don't think it's going to be successful. Because I think people do like the feel of these smaller, lightweight cameras. It's only the real die-hard digital SLR fanatics that say they love those massive, big bodies. Once you start to get used to and using the Sony cameras, I definitely don't want to go back, but that's a personal thing. So that's what he's saying there. He also talks about Tamron and Sigma, and he says it's a great thing that's starting to happen in the industry, and that will only help Sony. Cheers. He's saying, how long will it be before Canon and Nikon join Sony mirrorless full-frame bodies? He thinks that it'll be next year's CP+. So that's interesting that he actually said that. And he's talking about things like eye autofocus and things like that. They have to get into the marketplace. If they don't, they're going to be in real trouble. Another thing there he's talking about, do you think we'll see mirrorless cameras in the 2020 Olympics? And he says yes. And he talks about that as well. We saw some photographers using the Sony Alpha 9 at this year's Winter Olympics. You know, and you just look at the coverage. It's perfect for doing that type of sport. Now, some things for people for APS-C, he's talking about that there. He also says, we know some people think we've neglected the APS-C market, but it's just an issue of prioritisation. He's saying a couple of years ago, we introduced the A6500, and then basically he's saying, then we introduced the A9 and the A7 III. But we think the APS-C market and the APS-C customers are both very important. Because the majority of the market is the APS-C, and I think still the biggest selling camera was the A6300 or whatever. It might be the A6500 now, I'm not sure. But he says, we are developing many kinds of APS-C products. Please be patient. So there you go. So perhaps there is going to be an A7000 or something coming up, hopefully fairly soon. He also starts talking about firmware updates. And if you read into this, basically what he's saying is they don't upgrade the firmware like someone like Fuji, because they are replacing the bodies so often with new features and things like that that you may not be able to do through firmware. But that's what I'm getting from that. And he just says their user upgrade software is very important. And new model cycle is speedy, however, and I think that firmware updates are something we should offer. So hopefully that might mean that as the market tends to grow a little bit, that they may start to give us a few more extra features in firmware upgrades like Fuji have, for instance. But at this stage, I think they're developing things so fast that they probably haven't had the time to do that. Anyway, let me know in the live discussion what you think about all those points, and I'll come back to it when we stop the discussion here. This is another interesting thing. Samsung said they want to dethrone Sony in the image sensor business. I went, whoa, when I first saw this, but they're actually only talking about phone sensors at this stage. The interesting thing is, though, that the NX1 was an amazing camera, and it really is a pity that Samsung went out of that market, because that camera was way ahead of its time. I even thought about getting one of those. I'm glad I didn't, but I did think about getting that early on. It'd be interesting to see if that sells really well, whether they would go back to their full frame sensors and things like that, or APS-C sensors or whatever they were in. So anyway, that's an interesting discussion. I'll put that down below so you can have a look at that as well. I wanted to just talk about this because I've had a few people ask me about this Voigtlander, the 35 1.4 FE. There are a couple of reviews out now that you can have a look at. I love my Voigtlander that I use on my Panasonic 10.5, 0.95. But basically, if you read the reviews on this, and this is one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because they're saying that the reviews aren't stellar for this. They're saying it's not a perfect lens, but it's also not a bad lens. And the thing that sometimes you have to understand is that sometimes people buy these more vintagey lenses for the vintage type of look that they give you. Because remember, a lot of the modern lenses give you a modern look in the way that they look in the viewfinder and on the screen when you view them. Some of the older lenses aren't perfect, but that can be a really good thing sometimes, because some of these vintage lenses do have a really beautiful look. It's like sometimes I like to go back to have a look at that film look, because there is a difference between film and digital. So sometimes having it as being not a perfect lens can actually be a good thing. Remember, you don't always have to have a perfect looking images, particularly for clients, because remember, clients aren't pixel peepers like what most of the photographers are. So again, that might be the perfect look that you're looking for. So have a look at that review anyway if you're interested in it. Just see what it has to say. But it might be something that you could rent and have a look at and see whether you like that look of that lens first before you go about believing the reviews. Because not everything should be done by DxO. And that's why I said even with the A7 III, I like real-world reviews because it shows more than a lot of the things with charts and stuff like that. But anyway, I just thought I'd discuss that with you. This is another interesting one too. Oh, I should go back because let me just go back to this for a minute. That was the Voigtlander one. And they're the reviews down here. So you can have a look at that as well. Remember, one of the big advantages of these lenses are they're not fly-by-wire, so if you're focusing, it is beautiful to do manual focusing. This next one, we had did I go back? No, I didn't. I'm going to go back here just so you can see it. There, so you can see that's a beautiful focus ring coming through, and there's 2 reviews that you can see down here. This next one, a Sony engineer has said that it confesses he would completely redesign the menu based on the new touchscreen interface, and I think this is probably going to happen eventually. Remember, Sony do make great mobile phones, so it wouldn't be a hard task to redesign the menu systems on the back to use the touchscreen focus. And I have to admit, I adore the touchscreen focus on the A9 and all the other cameras, the A6500. I use that all the time. I very rarely use the joystick on the cameras, to be honest, and that's probably a personal thing, but I'm nearly always just using the touchscreen to move to where I want focus to be. And that way I know exactly where it's going to go. I find it works really well, and it works for me, and I love the way it can rack focus and things like that, and it's great. So it is only a matter of time before they probably do release a new menu system that will use the touch interface at the back. Having said that, I've had discussions with before on here that I really do believe that the Sony menu systems are not as bad as everyone makes out. Remember, all of these menus are only an issue when you first move over. If you've got a Canon camera and you're used to Canon, you will have real trouble if you go over to Sony. The same is the opposite. When I went from my Sony camera when I reviewed that Profoto A1 and I went back to the Canon 5D Mark IV, I'd never used Canon before. I was always a Nikon shooter. I had real trouble working through the menus. I could not work out where everything was, and I was really uncomfortable. So again, I could have made an argument there that their menus suck. And that's the first thing that they'll say when they come from another system to that system, and it's because they don't know it. Once you know the menu system, they don't suck. There's a lot of them, but how often do you seriously go into it? With this, basically, I have everything set when you look at it through here. I've got all of my stuff. Let me see if I can just turn it on. Nearly all the features that I actually want are coming through the FN menu at the back, through there. So they're all the things that I'm actually working out that, just let me see if I can change the focus on this so it comes a bit darker. Yeah, so I'm using the FM menu on the back through there. I've got everything basically set up there that I need. The other thing is too, you've got buttons all over the place. You've got C buttons all over the place that you can set stuff into, everything else. You can also use, you've got memory 1, 2 and 3 on here, and then you've got other settings if you want to go inside there where everything can be set in. To be honest, I very rarely touch the menu button on the back. I don't do that very often. So these guys that talk about, oh my God, the Sony menus are so bad, it's just rubbish, honestly. If you can't learn that menu system after using it for a few weeks, you've got problems. Because seriously, there is no issue with it. I use it all the time. I have no trouble going through the menus, finding what I need. And like I said, to be honest, I very rarely open the menu because everything I've got is set in menu buttons and the memory recall buttons. So I think people just need to get over it. But having said that, I do wish you could touch the screen at the back on a touch screen. That would be fantastic. If you could just click in there and touch what you needed to get through it. And again, if they wanted to update the menu and make it more modern, well, I'd be all for that, and I think that would be a fantastic thing to do. So like I said, I'll put that in the comments down below. I thought this was a great statement as well. Canon fanboys are going to have a go at me again. Canon have just made this statement that, what was it? We can't see it down here. Let me just move this. A bullish comment statement: with new mirrorless cameras, they will get 50% market share of the entire ILC market. I mean, honestly, Canon. You're going to have to do a hell of a lot better than what you've got now, I can tell you that. And I've got a feeling you may have already left it too late. You've got to remember that if you think that what Sony have already released, and they've still got to release, Canon haven't released anything yet in that marketplace that's any good. By the time they release something next year, who knows what Sony will have by that time. So I really think, honestly, saying that sort of statement is a bit crazy, I think. But we'll all have to wait and see. But let me know in the discussion too what you guys think about that as well. And lastly, before we go to questions, I just wanted to talk to you about this because I've talked a number of times about when I use my just let me move this out of the way. I've talked to you a number of times about when I use my 70-200, because remember, I did talk to you about that I use my 70-200 millimeter quite a lot. I mean, not quite a lot. I use it when I need compression and things like that. And the reason why I took it was because I was a fair way away from this bride and groom. This was shot from yesterday. I was a fair way away from the bride and groom yesterday. I ended up shooting this at, if you look up here, I ended up shooting it at 130 millimeters. This was shot with the A9. It was 1/400th of a second at f4, and it's a 70-200 f4. Now, this is where I was talking about I don't need the G Master because I'm comfortable with working with this lens, and I really am happy with the amount of weight that this lens gives me. Again, I'm not bagging the G Master. I know I get people saying that I'm bagging the G Master. I'm not. I'm just saying I don't need it and it doesn't work for me. But this is where I love having this lens, because I couldn't have shot this lens with any other lens that I had, because basically the next longest lens that I had was the 85mm Batis with me. And I found this lens is lovely to use. It's really light, it's nice and sharp, it focuses incredibly quickly. But I just thought I'd show you this. You can see Kerry here is standing over there with the Profoto B1, lighting them up because it was reasonably dark. Now I'll take it down to show you where I've exposed this, because I'll just show you down here. So it was exposed down, basically down here. That was what I shot for, because I wanted to make sure I got enough ambient light in the clouds. I'll just take that back to where it was roughly. And you can see the flash is actually fired off if you look through here as well. So you can see the actual flash has actually fired off. Now, normally when I edit these, I don't change sky backgrounds, but because this is an impact image, I wanted to share this as a sneak peek. So I did want this to have a lot of impact for their first image that I actually edited. There's another thing as well, is the... let me just bring up something so I can just show you. The other thing that was annoying me too was the buoy, obviously, that's here. So I would have had to retouch that out. And obviously I'm going to have to retouch Kerry out because she's standing there holding the flash in that position as well. And I was a long way. I basically had to use sign language to tell them which way to look, because I didn't want them looking directly at me. I wanted them to look out to the ocean. I also wanted them to sort of hold hands and be a little bit apart, because I just thought that might have added a bit more dynamic to the actual image. The other thing too was, because it was really, really overcast, I found that this was just a little bit boring, even underexposed, and I tried to add contrast and stuff, and it just didn't add enough in. So I decided in this case to just add a little bit of clouds from another image that I took earlier on in the day, actually. And so basically what I did was I ended up doing that. So I'll show you the retouched one, and you can see I only did it subtle, but it's enough to give it a bit of colour. So that was the retouched image that I've added there. You can see too how the flash has given just them a little bit of separation from that background. Otherwise they were going to be, you know, really dark. Now, even though it's fired off here, it has made a big difference to how they looked without the flash. I should have taken one complete without the flash, and you would have seen that they basically disappear completely into the background. So having that flash exposure has given me the ability, you can see it in his shirt, Nathan's shirt, and the face. It has given me that separation from the background that I needed. And remember, the trick here to do this is to make it so it doesn't look like it's been lit too much by flash, and that's what I've shot here in this respect. So yeah, I'm not a real big fan of adding in fake clouds, but I just thought that needed just a little bit something for their sneak peek. And like I said, that's the first one that I post out from their wedding, and I did want that to look a little bit more special, so I have done that, and I've retouched Kerry out obviously, and the boy's been retouched out. So anyway, I thought I'd talk about that. So that's one case where I have used my 70-200. That's why I'll always carry my 70-200 f4 with me in it. And like I said, this was shot yesterday. I'm really happy. The results from what I've seen so far are going to be beautiful from that wedding, and I'll show you some other images shortly. So let's go to questions, because I'd love to know what you guys have to say. So let me bring this back, and let's bring this back. Now, put at David Osler, guys, too, if you want to ask a question, because I'll actually see it. Most people are just saying hi. David said, thanks, a wee Scottish ale. He's having a wee Scottish... Oh, that's all right, David. I wasn't sure. I hit one of David's comments. That's fine, David. Sorry, I wasn't sure what it was. That's why I just hit it. Sorry, buddy. What else have we got? Now, as Ewan said, I was hands-on at the Sony A7 III pre-launch and sharing event yesterday in Singapore. Confirmed with the Sony staff that there is an A filter in the camera, AA filter. Yeah, from what I've seen, I'm not really fussed, to be honest, about the AA filter being there or not. Again, you know what? Most of this sort of stuff comes down to being the typical pixel peeper of what most of these photographers are, you know. And guys, photography is an art, and no matter how you look at it, that's the way you should really be thinking. Because trust me, I've got bookings well into 219, even some into 220 at this stage for weddings, more than whatever I can handle. And you don't sell work on being a pixel peeper. And this is the thing that I have to say to you people. And this is why I had to go the other day about people looking under graphs and pie charts for things like resolution and all this sort of stuff. And someone had to go at me saying something. And I said, look, I'm an artist. I don't want to classify myself as a photographer. And I do tell my customers this when they come in. I actually say, look, I want you to think of me as an artist. I don't want you to think of me as a photographer. I want to be thought of as an artist. And that's the way I think you do have to think. The second you start to go into too much technical aspects of whether something is sharp, you know, is that image perfectly sharp? Is that image a little bit grainy? Things like that. Is the image a little bit noisy? Your clients aren't going to care about that sort of stuff. What you should be submitting is the best artwork that you can give to your customers. And if you can do that, they'll hire you on that. My customers don't hire me because I shoot Sony. My customers don't hire me because I shoot mirrorless. They hire me for my work. They wouldn't give a rat's whatever if the image is noisy, if the image is a little bit out of focus, if the image is whatever. They just look at the impact that image has, the meaning, the message that that photo has, and things like that. So you really do have to think about that. So having said that, I really don't care if the Sony A7 III has an AA filter. All I care about is if it works for me and if it will work for my client. So, you know, I wouldn't get too head up on that at all. Peter said, interesting that Sony's have that jump at 640 ISO. Yeah, I know, it's interesting. It is like it's dual native. I'm not sure why that's, but I know like I said, the ISO on the A9 was linked fairly high as well. It often has something to do too with getting that perfect shutter speed and everything else, and dynamic range. Jean said, nevertheless, we had some time to try out the camera and the sharpness is fine. Yep. And I agree. Thanks for saying that. From my perspective, it is pretty much the same level of detail as the Sony A9. Thank you so much for that. Peter said blinkers or blinders. He's talking about when I was talking about having blinkers on eyes. Marcus said compact discs were a thing once also. Your comment makes total sense. The problem is, Marcus, too many people wait too long to do things and then they get left behind. And you know, if you want to move and get on in life, you can't be like that. because the market will leave you behind. I'm telling you, it will leave you behind. It's like, for instance, you can't just rely on Facebook to get work anymore. Most kids you'll find now are not using Facebook. They're using Instagram. So if you're not pushing Instagram, you're missing out on a massive amount of your work. But you'll get people again that put blinkers on and they'll say, I'm only going to use Facebook. That's where I'm targeting my marketplace. And you're going to miss a whole stack of people that are moving over to other areas. You'll even say some photographers say, I'm not going to use social marketing. And again, I'll go, whoa. All my work comes from social marketing. That's where it all comes from. Very rarely do I ever advertise. I've had a lot of works being published in magazines. Yes, that helps. And I haven't paid for that. Sometimes I've been asked to pay for it and I've said, no, I don't need to because it's published without me even asking. So I usually get all my work from word of mouth and social marketing. So that's the important thing for me. So unless you're pushing it down that line, again, you're going to have real trouble getting work. So you do have to really think about that. But, you know, like I say, don't have blinkers on. Always be aware of what's out there. You know, what are the new trends that are moving, and try and be into that trend right from the beginning if you can. You've got to think like that as much as you can if you want to make your business successful. Remember, there's no way I will ever give away my photography. And even if my YouTube channel keeps growing, and I hope it does, there's still no way I'm ever going to give that side of it up, because like I said to you too, I believe I'm an artist and I do want to think like an artist, and that's the most important thing for me that I actually want to do. So I want to think of myself as an artist. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about that, but I do rant a bit sometimes, but it's just important to me. John said too, also the other issue on the build quality, the A7R III and the A9 has a full magnesium body, while the A7 III has less magnesium structure at the back. We tapped the back and it felt different. Yeah, well, you know what? You can't expect that camera at that price range to be the same as the A7R III and the A9. I mean, that doesn't bother me as well. You get what you pay for in a lot of respects. That's probably a body for me, particularly as a business person, that, you know, I will probably keep for 2 years and then something else will be out and I'll be updating anyway. Some of you obviously can't do that, but it's probably the way that I will work it. But I'm not too fussed at all if it's not the same magnesium body either. You can't expect it to have for that price. Mel said, the problem with the first is no number of units sold is high, but profits is low. Look at Canon's FS and you will find that they are making less versus Sony. That could be true, yeah, too. Photo Mike's here. G'day, mate. Good to see you in here. Harish said, what about Fuji's role? Well, I think Fuji are fantastic. Make fantastic cameras. I think Sony, though, have been hurt by the A7... Fuji have been hurt by the A7 III announcement, to be honest. Before the Sony A7 III came out and the XH1 was released, I thought, wow, that's really an amazing camera. But to be honest, I just think the Sony A7 III has blown that out of the water now. But if you are into Fuji's line, the lenses are fantastic. The ergonomics of the camera is beautiful, because that's one thing I love about the A9 is having the extra buttons. I love, you know, having the actual manual controls all through here, rather than say on the A7R III or the other cameras is beautiful, and I love that, and I wish they brought that onto all of their cameras. And that's where the XH1 is really good, and all the Fuji cameras are. They do give you that great analog controls, and I think it is easier to do that rather than going through menus. But remember, Fuji don't have full frame, so that's a problem for me particularly. Mel said, this is due to high discounting of their cameras. I got my Mark 6 kit for only US $541. Now the M50 is selling about 700 bodies only. That's how they are selling their... So they're changing their money all the time, yeah. Photomix said, Micro Four Thirds for life. Nothing wrong with that, mate. I mean, I love my GH5. I think it takes great photos. It's underrated. Would I change and go fully that? No. I wouldn't sell my Sony full frame at all at this stage. Steve's having a Guinness. Oh, I wanted that yesterday because it was St. Patrick's Day yesterday, and I always go down and get a Guinness, Steve. But yesterday I had the wedding, so I couldn't do it. No, I was shattered that I couldn't actually have a Guinness yesterday. Yuan said he just sold his A6500 for the same reason. Yeah, I think that's probably a good move, mate, if you can. Definitely I'd move to that rather than the A6500. Photomeek said, yeah, but the A6500 comes with a lens for people starting out. Yes, it does. But if I was starting out, I still wouldn't be buying that camera. I have to be honest, I would now be getting the A7 III. Just said, Jason Vaughn says APS-C is going to die. I don't think it's going to die. And if you look at that, Sony have said that saying that it's still going to be out there. I think there's always probably going to be a market for that type of camera, more at the lower end. And like I've said to you before, I think it's the best gimbal camera out there. I won't be getting rid of mine, that's for sure. Mel said, the second argument of the 70+ lens lineup can be busted simply. You're talking about Canon lenses. Once Canon goes MILC, all those lenses are mute. They can be used only with adapters as transition takes decades. Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see if you're right there, which way they go. Unless they do a larger body, like I said, that could be a possibility. Peter said, Fuji is still a little too immature. I switched to Fuji last year, and although I'm happy with their system, they're still not completely reliable. Sony Gen 3 seems more reliable now. That's interesting that you say that. Haresh said, I'm buying an XH1 tomorrow. I have faith in Fuji. If it's not 100%, then they will make better firmware. Look, you still can't go wrong with buying that camera. That's still an amazing camera. It's not like you're going to buy that camera and think, this is terrible. I think that is an amazing camera. I just think that the Sony A7 III has upped that now, and they're basically the same. Well, the XH1, to get the same features, you need to buy the battery grip, and then it makes it even more expensive. So the Sony is actually cheaper, but Fuji's lenses would be cheaper. David said the A6500 actually came out in November 2016. What else? Jared Williams said, yes, saw Max's video today, and he concludes the A7 III is a great upgrade from the good old A7 II. Photo Mike said, now A-mount, that's dead. Yeah, I think you're right. I think A-mount is not going to be supported. They may bring out another camera, but I wouldn't be buying into A-mount now if you're in that system. I definitely wouldn't. I'd be saying I'm going to make the break. You're in the same position as if you're shooting something else. You either need to buy the adapters and use that, or just try and sell it now, get the money back that you can, and then buy into the E-mount system. I think you're right there. What else have we got? Peter said, yeah, the A6300 and the A6500 gap, yeah, that was very small. And it was, I suppose, if you just bought an A6300 and then that came out, I could understand you'd be a little bit upset. I never get upset with Sony releasing cameras like they do at all, because I do not have to buy that camera straight away. I can actually buy that camera later on if I want to. I'm just happy that they're innovating. I'd prefer them to be that way than, say, being like Canon. So, you know, that's a thing that you've got to think of. Do you want Sony to be innovating, or do you not want them to be innovating? I'm just happy that they're innovating. It might mean that you miss or skip one version, then get the next one, but, you know, we all win. Photomeek said, some of us like the ergonomics of bigger camera. Yeah, and I understand that. And like I said, it comes down to a personal thing, but can appreciate mirrorless technology. Sony has an A-mount and an E-mount system. Why can't Nikon and Canon do the same? Well, if you look at that, Sony do have that, but one's not being produced anymore. So that's why I don't think it will happen. It's a lot of money to put into two baskets, and I don't think that's a good way of doing it, but that's just my opinion. I think if you're going to do it, you really have to do it all up, or not at all. But anyway, that's probably a thing that you may not agree with, but we all think something different on that. Remember, it's hard to think about what's going to happen in the future too, but I don't think having two systems is going to work. Brad said, this is a good interview. Thank you. Photomeek said, not everyone wants tiny cameras, especially if they have big hands and want space between the buttons and bigger batteries. And I can see that, but it's definitely not for me. I hate going back to those bigger batteries, but you can always put a battery grip on. But some people, yeah, do find that on some of these cameras, they have trouble, you know, between the grip and the lens. I suppose if that's the case, you have to make a decision which way you want to go. What else? Brad said, I wish they would ask him if they will ever allow updating via memory card and not dependent on the stupid USB port. I know, I wish they'd do that like Panasonic. The GH5, you just put the memory card, the firmware onto the memory card, put the memory card in and you update from that. Oh, it's so easy. I hate that stupid way Sony does it. It drives me nuts. Brad said he wants a mirrorless 1DX Mark II. Yeah, I can understand why. Peter said, I want that Samsung 16-50 2.8 lens. I know that would be amazing. Photomeek said, I want a mirrorless D500 at that size, obviously. Brad Harris, you can't. It's called the Sony A9. What else have I said? Gerald said Sigma Chief gave dates for each of the Sigma Art E-mount lenses. Yes, I've heard there is dates released for that yet. Shane said that firmware comment by them is weak. Sony could add new menu systems to the older cameras, and they could, Shane, and I agree. And I've talked about that before. I do think that Sony should look after their customers better than what they have done with firmware. They really could do that. And honestly, I do not think that's going to affect people still buying the newer cameras. I do understand that there's some things that you can't do because of hardware limitations, but they could definitely upgrade their firmware better like Fuji does. Yes, and I'm fully in support of that, and I do hope it's something that Sony actually start to do. Brad said, I've never understood the menu complaint, and I agree with that. I don't think that's a good argument either. The menu is not a problem. I don't know about that, David O. So Panasonic's menu system is really intuitive. It is quite good, but it did take me a little time to learn it. Definitely the Panasonic one is better than the Canon one I found, though. Yeah, so I do agree with you there. Long Island Hillbillies here from New York. G'day. Peter is saying, I disagree. It has Sony for 2 years and the item order makes no sense. It's like they added items as they thought of it and not grouped properly. The new favourites menu will not help a lot. Are you talking about the Sony one? I use that favourite menu all the time. I love it, Peter. But like I said, it's a personal thing. Photomike said Canon is the reason Sony doing well. Yeah, and the other thing is too, Nikon hasn't been as affected as I think Canon will because the Nikon lenses just don't work as well on the Sony gear as what the Canon lenses do. So that is an issue. So I think Canon definitely have more to lose than what Nikon have with people moving over. But having said that, I sold all my Nikon gear and moved over. Sam said the touch surface is the entire screen. All they would have to do is redo the menu and the firmware, and every Sony full-frame camera would have this. And I agree with you. You're right. There's no reason why they couldn't do that with firmware. I don't think they'll do it, though, but they could. I mean, we're still hoping to get video features on the A9, and they haven't given us that yet. So Sony definitely don't add really good firmware updates at all. They're definitely not like Fuji, that's for sure. Or Panasonic. Panasonic did some amazing upgrades for video that came out with their version 2 firmware. What have we... Gerald said, will you wait for the A7 III release before you buy the A7 III? I'm not sure, Gerald. I don't know. I've got a feeling the shop will call me when the A7 III comes in. They did with the A7 III. I didn't go in and try it out that immediately because I thought I'd be in trouble if I did. I might go in and try it. Because I buy so much gear, they often do hold stuff for me. So I may go in and try it and then make a decision then. But I haven't put it on pre-order. Depending on what the A7 III has, I'll see how we go there. But remember, I'm coming into my winter period. And then everything goes really quiet for a while. So I probably wouldn't buy an A7 III until well later in the year. But I may get the A7 III later this year. Yes, if it's released and it has what I need in it. If it has 4K 60p, you know, and I would really love it, but I'm hoping too they bring out an A700 with that as well, an APS-C camera. If it has 4K 60p, better, obviously, better focusing. The low light really doesn't bother me that much because I do add lighting in now, and I'm quite comfortable working up to, I very rarely go over 3200. So low light for me really in that case doesn't mean that much to me anymore. The A7 III low light is ample. The A9 and even the A7 II, I'm quite comfortable using that for low light. So I'll have to see what that has, but I probably will get the A7 III sometime, yeah, and probably later next year. The A7 III, I'll make a decision probably when I go and see it. Peter said, yes, the My Menu solves it. It does. The My Menu, for instance, if you look at it on my camera, I know these discussions go for ages, guys, but I mean, it's just things that I like to talk about, and it's questions that you want to, you like to have a look at. So if you look at my menu, you can see they're things that I've got in my menu. These are the main things that I'm using all the time to set up my camera. So if you look at it, that's only page 1. Page 2, I've got, nothing actually. So I've got flash compensation inside there, so I can immediately just move my flash compensation in there. I've got it so I can turn electronic front curtain shutter on or off due to the flash sync speed. But having said that, I'll never have to touch that with my Pro Photo. It never seems to have issues with raising the, turning the front curtain off and having the dark shadow down the bottom. It will definitely be a problem though if I'm using other flashes. If you go over really 1,000, 2,000th of a second, you should turn the electronic front curtain off. I've got the Finder monitor because if I'm doing video, I like to turn that off because it can be a problem if it switches. But the trick to that is, and the really great thing for that is if you open, just let me switch this for a second. If you open this bit, even just a fraction outside of the body, it disables that touch screen. So that's one great feature about that. So as long as that's out, the thing won't switch. See how now it's not switching? If I close that, it will go. All right, see how now it's switching? So that's all you have to do is just bring it out just a touch like that, and then it no longer does it. So that's a great workaround if you don't want to do that. The other thing is I've got live setting, view display settings there as well, because if I'm working in studio, I need to turn live view settings displays off. I've got S and Q there as well, and I've also got the file format so I can change file formats on the go. So again, I really don't need to touch much outside of that. And so they're the main areas that I'll go into just to use that. So I love that fast menu. It's great, to be honest. How long have we been going? 1 hour 40. I'm shocking. We talk forever on these things. What else have we got? Peter said everyone should wait for the A7 III before ordering the A7 III, at least until I get mine. Life said, since we both follow Joe Elderman, you know that he wouldn't agree. He would say that Sony is not the answer for getting great shots. It's about the photographer. And I did talk about that, about art before, Life's Beautiful, that it really is the photographer that's the main thing that matters. Gerald said, yes, the A7 III is due around April the 18th. So it's not long off anyway. Fake clouds, yep, I did put that on. Like I said, I very rarely do that, DS Greg, but I just wanted that for that impact image on that first image. Gerald Williams said, do you think Nikon or Canon will do a better job with their first top quality full frame mirrorless camera release? It's hard to say. I mean, they've had enough time to develop it, so you would hope that they do a really good job. Whether, though, they can match... Remember, the interesting thing is these cameras would have been probably in development for 3 years, so whether they can still match what Sony have just released in the A7 III or the A7 III is going to be interesting, or even the A7R III. I think you have some AP people, angry photographer... people in here tonight. I think the happy photographer is going to come back, Casper. He's going to have to do another broadcast soon, I think. Educate said, if you think cameras are just tools, and the Sony A7 III, A7S III, FS7R, Sony Action Cam and DJ Maverick Pro are pretty much all you need for short films. Well, you could do basically everything with those cameras. Brad said, only 24 megapixel cameras have AA filters. Yep, that's true. I remember being disappointed about an AA filter on the A9 until I saw how detailed. Like I said, don't worry about that at all. It's not an issue. It's not an issue at all. Like I said, it's only photographers that worry about that sort of stuff. Peter Kent said, I need social marketing tips. I will go through some of that stuff eventually. What else have we got? Juan said, yep, correct. The AA filter isn't an issue, just stating the facts. Yep, and I knew you were doing that, mate. Yes, it does have one, but rightly said, photography is an art. Life's Beautiful said, at Peter Ken, Joe Edelman has 2 good videos about this topic. Gerald said, I have the A7 III ordered, but keeping my A6500 for gimbal use. Yeah, and I'd be the same. Best gimbal camera out there, and that's why I'll be keeping mine. Plus, it's a great little backup camera, or great little travel camera. Casper said the Sony A7 III is the best camera pound for pound that will knock out the competition. It will. It's going to be hard to beat that for a while. Educate Tube said, A-mount is not dead. I have the 135 1.8 Zeiss and the Minolta 2870 with the LAEA4 adapter. Okay, for 1/3 of the price used. You can get good affordable lens, great bang for the buck. Yeah, I just don't know. I wouldn't be buying A-mount now though, but yeah, I mean, it's a hard decision to make and to see which way that goes. Sony definitely don't seem to be supporting it though. Peter Kent said, I saw a new favourites menu, would be a lot of help. Jolly said, would you sell Sony A7 III for the A7 III? No. Well, no, I probably wouldn't. If you've already got it, I wouldn't be losing the money that you're going to lose to sell that to buy something else in that range. I'd be keeping the A7 III and then saving up eventually and then getting that camera as a backup or something like that. The other thing too, it just depends on what you shoot. Now, I did go through all those shoots a little bit earlier in one of my videos where I talked about what each one would be for. So perhaps you could go back and look at that video. But it's a hard decision if you've already bought that camera because you're going to lose a lot of money to change. Peter said, the fact that Sony won't add video features to the A9 tells me that the A9S is on the way. Well, eventually. I don't think it's going to be a while, Peter, though. You know what, though? Having said that, guys, I used to worry about that when that first came out. I was sort of shattered that the A9 never had all the flat profiles, everything else. To be totally honest, I've moved away from using them completely. I was finding that, remember, because I'm doing Fusion, now obviously if you're just a full-on videographer, you may think differently to me, but I'm talking about it from my point of view. I'm doing Fusion, which is meaning I'm going to be doing video and stills at the same time, and I have to try and get that around to the customer in as quick as the time I can do it. The problem for me is that with doing that, if I'm starting to, say, create the videos as well as editing all the photography videos, because I don't want to send images out to anyone else to work on, because it's people hire me for the look that I give them. And that's the thing with it for me. So for me, it's really important that I'm editing everything. Now, I was finding that when I started to use flat profiles, and I did for quite a while, the amount of editing that I had to do went up incredibly. It was terrible, the amount of editing I had to do. So now I'm actually just shooting in the standard profile and I'm not having any issues. And I'm finding, to be honest, it's nearly always good enough for me to shoot that way. So I'm not as stressed about it as I used to be. And to be honest, I've still found that the A9 has the best video I've ever used. It's by far the nicest looking video that I've ever used, particularly if you're dealing with autofocus as well, and it's using that 6K downsampling, and I'm sure the A7 III is going to be just as good. So it'll be great. But I'm tending to use just the standard profiles. I do use Cin 4 sometimes which I can't do on there, which is a pity, but I'm finding the standard profile is working for me. So I'm not anywhere near as stressed as what I used to be about that. Having said that, should they put it in? Yes, they should. What's saying? Educate Tube says, don't buy the Sony A7 III if you already have the A7 II. You just need FS700R with Atmos Inferno monitor and the ability to do 4K 60. Yeah, the only thing is if you're doing that though, see, for a run and gun photographer, it gets hard. I've got the Atmos Ninja monitors and stuff, and I just don't like using them. It's too much work. So for me, I like to be able to just do run and gun and do it like that and travel as light as possible and just get it out there. The problem is if you're dealing with the A7 III and you want to get the autofocus that will give you, if you do want to do that, I would be buying the A7 III, but you probably have a different feeling there than what I'd be sort of recommending. Educate Tube. Now, and like I said, we all see different things. Gerald said, "What is your main studio work? Which is your main studio work camera and why?" Main studio work camera, if I'm dealing in the studio, is my A7 III because I want the resolution, and I do high-end retouching. So if I'm doing that, that's what I'll be using in the studio. Usually is the A7 II. Whereas eventually I'd get the A7 III and use it for that. So if you're dealing with that, that's what I'd be using. The camera I use the most, though, is the A9. As soon as I step outside the studio, doing portraits, doing weddings, events, whatever I'm doing, it's the A9. But studio, definitely the A7 II. Long Island Hillbilly said, the angry photographer bashed Sony for not having medium format, ignoring the fact that Fuji does not have a 35mm format. Such a silly video. I think he should be called the silly photographer. I don't know if Sony are even going to do 35mm. I know there's a different look if you're dealing... I used to shoot 35mm when I did fashion years ago. Medium format. But, I don't know, now you're dealing with... You can get unbelievable results with something like a D850 or the A7 III or the A7 II, and who knows what the new one of that's going to come out, 50, 60 megapixels. I don't know, and plus the problem is you have to shoot them in a certain way. They're very slow in the way that they work, very slow in focusing. I wouldn't be buying one, but that's me personally. I'm quite happy using now the high megapixel full frame cameras. But will they still be a market for them? Yes, but it's only going to be real high end type work, and I think that gap is closing all the time. Life's Beautiful said, let's give David a thumbs up. Oh, thanks so much for that. How many? Yeah, if you can give me a thumbs up, I really appreciate that. Gerald said he's keeping the A7 III and getting the A7 III. Yeah, and they're going to work beautifully together. Peter Kent said, I also do photo and video for weddings. I found I can't do more than 2 a month. I tried doing 3 a month. After 4 videos, I got so behind I had to take a month off to catch up. And that can be an issue, Peter. I have a 9-week workaround. So the weddings that I do, like the one I did yesterday, they will get their images 9 weeks' time. So I do sort of work around that. And often I'm actually catching up during the winter months when I go quiet with weddings. But having said that, I only go quiet with weddings. Everything else is still going. I mean, all my model shoots are still going. My portraits are still going, things like that. So, I've still got enough work to tick over. But at least the weddings dry out and I can start to do all of that as well. It is hard if you're doing Fusion, I have to admit, but I do love doing it. I love having that extra feature, and I found it's made my business grow more than anything, being able to offer video as well as stills at the same time. Then I never have issues with working with other people or they're getting in my way and taking longer. Remember, if you've only got an hour and a half to do formals, if you've hired a videographer as well, they have to have also the same time you have. So you can basically say that hour and a half is split in half. Now, because I'm doing everything together at the same time, I don't really lose any time at all. So for me, that advantage in itself is massive, and I just put it on as another $1,500 to shoot Fusion. I'm only offering a 3 to 4 minute video, so I'm not doing documentary style footage. I'm only giving 3 to 4 minutes highlight, but I love doing it, and it certainly has made my business grow. Long Island Hillbilly, thank you so much for that donation. He said bring the happy photographer back. He will definitely be doing one. I've just got to wait for the right moment. What else? So any last questions before we call it a day? If not, leave your questions down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'll have a few more videos up this week for you as well. The live show will be back next Friday, Thursday your time, US and Europe. But it'll be back then because I've got another wedding on Saturday again, so I won't be definitely doing it on Saturday. So the live show, this live news and rumours will be on. I may pop up and do a couple of lives in the meantime anyway, because I just pop on and talk about what's current and what you guys may want to discuss with me. Like I said, these are always long, but people can always skip past bits if they want to. It's more about giving me or some information back to you and having a discussion about some of the things that are on there. It's not just about me growing and and having the $2, the 3-minute perfect one to get subscribers. That would be easy for me to do that, but that's not what I'm about. It's about giving stuff back to you guys. So they are a bit long, but buy yourself a Cascade beer, Dave Clark said. Thanks, Dave. I'm going to have some margaritas tonight. I can't wait to have that. Oh, I'm hanging out for that tonight. Gerald said, thanks, mate. Peter said, thanks. DS Greek said, thanks too. So I'll catch you all again soon, guys, for the next video. And I'll catch you all again soon. So it's good day from down under and talk again soon. Bye, guys.